president of the Montana Environmental Information Center in Helena, past board member of the Clark Ford Coalition in Missoula, and is the current president for the Citizens of Technical Environmental Committee that works on Superfund issues in Butte. To my left here is Mr. Shane Krauser. He's the founder and director of the American Academy for Constitutional Education. He's an adjunct professor at Glendale Community College, teaching constitutional law and criminal law and criminal justice. He is a trial attorney with the law firm of Miles Davis, McGuire Gardner. He's a prosecutor with the Maricopa Attorney's Office in Phoenix, Arizona. He was a prosecutor with the Maricopa County Prosecution Office in 2013. He's the host of the daily talk show Liberty Storm with Shane Krauser, author of the book Save Your Nation, certified NRA firearms instructor, undergraduate, worked at Arizona State University, and received his law degree from C.S. Quincy College of Law at the University of Utah in 2001. First question. Dr. Ray.
Madison, writing in the Federalist Papers, said this: if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. A dependence on the people is no doubt the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. Those auxiliary precautions about which Madison spoke were provided by the U.S. Constitution, which, like all constitutions, established the fundamental law and basic rules and processes of government. The Constitution was a human creation and contrivance to meet a very human end: provide for an effective national government. It was not handed down from Mount Sinai. It was a political document that contained many compromises. Its historical backdrop was the American Revolution and the problems that had occurred under the Articles of Confederation. Within the Constitution, there are anti-democratic elements. For example, the Electoral College. The states originally elected senators who didn't represent the people, they represented their states. The Senate was created to check the popularly elected House. The whole concept of judicial review and the federal judiciary system was, in a sense, anti or non-democratic because federal judges were not elected, and nowhere in the Constitution is mentioned judicial review. There were voting limitations. You can look at the history of the United States in part as the expansion of the right to vote. Those were some of the anti-democratic elements. There also were great silences in the Constitution, things that were not mentioned that are important today. Political parties, interest groups, the whole method of selecting candidates for office. The Constitution is silent on that part, but it's very, very important. And of course, a big issue that it was silent on, that ended up being decided by a war, was slavery. The point of all of this is that, as I said, the Constitution is a human document to meet a human need. And from its very ratification, it has undergone modification and change. Amendments to the Constitution, judicial review, and court decisions such as Mulberry versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden, changed the Constitution almost from the very beginning. Decisions by the President, decisions by the Congress changed the Constitution. In fact, it's interesting, Thomas Jefferson thought that what we ought to do is every generation should have a new constitution to meet changing times. And so we need to keep that in mind, the purpose of the Constitution, and that it is, as I said, a human contrivance to meet a human need. And it's always been subject to political tensions, the balancing of the rights of the individual with the desire to promote the common good, providing for limited government while at the same time trying to assure that the government actually did something and actually functioned. How to balance efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability. How do you have a strong central government while at the same time respecting the rights of the states and the rights of the people? And deciding how much democracy can be allowed without having chaos in society. Those were tensions back in 1787. There's still tensions with the Constitution today that have been resolved in different ways at different times. The Constitution also has basic principles that I would suggest we keep in mind for tonight's discussion. One is popular sovereignty, that the basis of the government, as you read in the preamble of the Constitution, is the social contract between the people in order to promote the common good. Separation of powers and checks and balances, which are interesting because on the one hand they were designed to prevent tyranny. We didn't want to go through what we had just gone through with England. But on the other hand, they necessitate compromise in order to get things done. So that positions upon which people are not willing to compromise because of the absolute truth or because God ordained the position means that the government will not function. The concept of judicial review is an inherent part of the Constitution today. Federalism, limited government, the rule of law, and constitutionalism. Representative government, where we don't govern directly, we govern through elected representatives who are in some sense responsible to the citizens. And an emphasis on individual rights. What's also interesting, if you look at constitutional history, Jefferson, as you know, wrote the Declaration of Independence and was very concerned about justifying the colonist revolt against England. A lot of the Declaration of Independence is grounded on the fact that the English system of government under which we had been subjected had denied individual rights to the colonists. And he wanted to give a justification for this revolt in the fact that we, as human beings, have natural rights which government needs to respect. And if government doesn't respect these rights, as he said, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it and substitute new forms of government. But what you need to keep in mind is the Declaration of Independence had a distinct persuasive or rhetorical purpose to justify the colonist revolt from England. Revolution was a serious matter, and the founders of our republic believed that they had to provide a strong justification for breaking ties with England. Probably a majority of Americans didn't agree that we should do that anyway. The Constitution is a different situation. It's setting up, and its processes and procedures were very much grounded in the 18th century, borrowed from political theorists like Montesquieu, which is where we got our separation of powers and checks and balances. The concern then was to set up a government that actually functioned to achieve those purposes that are mentioned in the preamble. The Constitution has a different purpose than the Declaration of Independence. And so what we're focused on this evening is the Constitution as an instrument of government. But not just the Constitution of 1887, but the Constitution as it has evolved over time to meet the changing needs of American society.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here. We're just having a great time as we travel throughout Montana, and thank you for hosting this. Without shame, I am a defender of the Constitution, and the Constitution is more relevant today in 2014 than it was in 1788 when it was ratified. It's a document worth defending. It's the longest operational constitution in the world. Brazil has had 8 constitutions since 1822. Afghanistan has had 5 in the 20th century alone. Look at a country like Russia that had 4 since 1917. Poland has had 7 since 1923. France has had 15 since R1. I think we are simply foolish to simply suggest that the Constitution has survived the test of time simply because nobody's done anything about it. There are specific principles that have allowed this document to survive the test of time. Separation of power, division of authority, issues of popular sovereignty, and probably most importantly, a republican form of government. There are some anti-democratic principles outlined in the Constitution, and for a good reason. We are not a democracy. Emphatically, we are not a democracy. We are a republican form of government as outlined in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. And so if you want to look at it perhaps a different way, the Constitution was put together in order to protect us against democracy, to protect us against mob rule. And so when we have an issue that we don't like about the Constitution, the solution isn't to allow politicians to do whatever they want, or professors from the pulpit to offer suggestions and then advocate that individuals use power to skirt around those principles outlined in the Constitution. There are remedies to change what it is that we don't like. It's Article 5 of the Constitution. There are remedies available to us. And what I'm suggesting is, let's get back to this document. Let's get back to what Samuel Adams said when he said, liberty must be supported at all hazards. Liberty must be supported at all hazards. Thomas Jefferson said, say no more of confidence in man, but bind him down with the chains of the Constitution. I fear that today, when we talk about the Constitution, we're not interested in creating chains because we have an agenda that falls outside of the parameters of that Constitution, and this Constitution, instead of becoming chains, has become rubber bands. It's become elastic, and we buy into this idea that it's somehow living and breathing in some way, shape, or form. A living and breathing Constitution is no Constitution at all. And we'll talk about that as well tonight. I suspect as we have this conversation, I take you back to King George and what he said to Lord North as the revolution begins. Blows must decide whether we will be subjects, or the colonists will be subjects, or whether they will be independent. And I suppose that's what much of this debate will be about tonight. What will we choose to do? Will we choose to be subjects to individuals that disregard the Constitution, or will we choose to be independent? Will we choose to operate under a document that maximizes freedom and limits tyrannical impulses if it's followed? It's been proven over and over and over again that when individuals operate outside its parameters, tyranny injects itself and oppresses the people. I would imagine that if I were to take a poll here, that every single one of you, or at least 98% of you, would say, you want to be left alone. We want to be left alone. And the Constitution revolves around the idea of leave me alone. And that government is supposed to operate within very confined parameters that focuses primarily on one issue, securing the rights of the people. In fact, in the Declaration of Independence, it said just that. To secure these rights, what rights? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. That's the primary function of government. Is when we violate the rights of one another, that government injects itself and resolves disputes. But we've allowed it to become so much more. We've allowed it to come to the point where we have bought into the lie that government knows how to run our lives better than we do. That we're not capable of making decisions, whether it's soda pop in New York or governing the land in our state. That somehow federal government is more capable of doing those things. That's simply absurd. And that is not in line with the idea of freedom. And so I suggest to you, and I don't think it's any surprise as we look at our Constitution, it is under attack. We've let politicians literally castrate it. And we've let individuals in the mainstream castigate it just the same. And so my suggestion is, let's get back to what it is that has allowed this people to prosper, to have opportunity, to experience freedom. We are the ultimate guardians. And my suggestion is we stand up together and we defend that document because it is deserving of just that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yes.
That's it, sir.
Oh, okay. I went around. Oh, okay, great.
You win the prize of the first question.
Oh, great.
And that is, religion in the political realm today, which would include private businesses, discriminated. Examples include the photographer in New Mexico, the florist in Washington, the Hobby Lobby case, etc. Does the First Amendment protect their actions?
If you look at the American system of government as established in the Constitution, I would first of all disagree that with modifications, one of the goals of the Constitution is to establish a democracy. You can see that in the preamble where it is based on the social contract that we the people, not the states, not God, we the people establish this government that follows. And I think it was Benjamin Franklin who was asked, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government are we going to get? This was after the Constitutional Convention. And he said a democracy if you can keep it. So all a republic means, it doesn't mean anything more than it uses representative government. And that the people do not rule directly, they rule through their representatives. But in any case, what is emphasized in our political tradition is freedom of thought, freedom of expression, toleration of differing political views and opinions, based on the contingency of political truth. Let me explain that very quickly. What I mean by that we don't know for certain, we don't know with mathematical and scientific certainty what should be the policy toward immigration, toward health care, toward defense. The best practical policy is the result of free discussion, deliberation, and debate on matters of public policy, with majority rule while protecting minority rights, and pluralism, where public policy is the product of group conflict and the public interest tends to emerge out of the welter of competing interests and debate and discussion. The founders, and this has developed over time, established an absolute wall of separation of church and state, religion from politics. And they were wise in doing that, not just because of the difficulties Europe had experienced when religion intervened into the political process, but because organized religion's approach to the truth, to how you know the truth, is totally inimical to the democratic process. In a religious setting, they try to instruct them to convert them, but eventually, if they don't change their mind, they have a perverse will and either need to be punished or silenced. That doesn't work in a democratic context of free debate, discussion, and exchange of views. And so fundamentally, organized religion is incompatible with our system of government insofar as religious dogma dictates public policy. Certainly religious people have a right to participate in the political debate and offer their views. The ideal thing is if they could defend their views by reference to secular reasons or non-religious reasons.